Welcome. This is the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is where you'll learn strategies to help you achieve lifetime financial freedom through real estate investment. Your host, Rod Khleif, has owned over 2,000 homes and apartments, and he brings experts in all aspects of real estate investment and management onto the show. Now, here's your host, Rod Khleif.
Welcome to the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. I'm Rod Khleif, and I'm thrilled you're here. Before we get to our awesome guest, I want to mention a couple of quick things. First being, if you like what you hear on the show, by all means, subscribe to us on iTunes. That way you never miss an episode. I also want to let you know that every week I also do a short 5 to 10 minute show called Your Driving Force Success Tip. And this is where I share with you the most valuable things I've learned about the psychology of success. Most people don't realize 80% of your success in anything is your psychology, and 20% is the actual mechanics. And I hope you'll join us on these shows. And most importantly, I really want to hear what you guys think. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions for guests or topics you'd like to hear on the show, please let me know. You can email me directly at rod@rodkhleif.com. That's R-O-D, Rod, at RODKHLEIF as in Frank.com. And I'd love to hear from you. All right, well, let's get this party started. I know you're going to get incredible value from the man we're interviewing today. His name is Cory Binsfield. He's a very successful real estate investor. He owns over 105 units, value over $7 million in Duluth, Minnesota, of all places. And he was featured in a Forbes article, which was very impressive. But he started as a buying from a distressed owner in 1998, bought a triplex, and has built up a 100-plus portfolio of small multifamily properties in his spare time with his own sweat equity, no partners, which is we're definitely going to dig into, and lots of creative financing, which we're definitely going to dig into. Cory, thanks for being on the show.
I'm glad I could be here.
So can you want to expand a little bit on my intro?
Yeah, I think, where would you want me to start?
Well, let's talk about that first deal. I guess
okay.
Let's start there. Let's go back there.
First deal, I think you have to go back even before that. I picked that one up in 1998, but up to that point, I'd been the classic guy that was always interested in real estate, buying books, buying courses, and trying to figure out, how I can take some action. And I think, you can waste a lot of money on these courses, but you always pick up some, little golden nuggets periodically. And I do remember on one of those courses, I think it was, this will really date me, but do you recall Carlton Sheets by chance?
Wow. I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah. I was actually listening to his tapes back when I was in the military, of all places. I was broke, but I was like, I'm going to buy real estate. So I think, that kind of led me to kind of formulating a plan. And the other mentor, or I could say, through books would be, you're down in Florida, so you probably know this guy, John Schaub.
Oh, yeah, he's fantastic. He actually lives in our town. He's a great guy. Yeah,
that guy, his book was really instrumental in the whole, buying one house a year and then retiring, let's say, after 10 years or so. So that really drove me as well, because he just laid it out and made it look like it was pretty simple. So going to that original deal, basically I was, driving
Hold on. I want to stop you for 1 second.
Sure.
Because you said something that I think I want you to expand on, because I think it relates to a lot of people. You said you were in that place where you were reading books and you wanted to do it, but you really didn't, take action. Is there any specific thing or advice you would give someone to take that first step?
I'd say the number one thing is, while you're reading the books and while you're trying to figure out how you can buy that first property, begin as if you're actually looking for that first property. So what I mean by that is actually take the action and start driving through neighborhoods, analyze deals and see, what's going to work, so that when you actually find the right deal, you can go ahead and basically, purchase it. And that's for someone that's even broke. They can continue to pretend as if they're going out to buy a property as they're trying to build up their seed capital. And that alone will give them, will give you a lot of experience on what works and what doesn't work. Because there is a lot of information out there, a lot of hype, infomercial style stuff that just, it won't work, So you have to get... You have to get realistic,
That's great advice. I hope you guys heard that. That's great advice. Even if you don't have money, you immerse yourself in it and you start learning it as if you do. Great advice. So tell us about that first deal then.
So that first deal, I was the guy with, very little money. I'd already tried to go and get approved for a loan prior to that. I was going to buy a property that my brother had owned, and he was living in it, and it really didn't fit my cash flow model, so I'm glad I never purchased it. But I remember being that I was self-employed because I was building up my investment business at the time. The tax returns didn't look too solid, so the bank basically said, "No, you can't do this deal." And so after that, I was like, well, I got to come up with a new strategy. So that's when I started scouting for what they call seller financing style deals.
So you got shut down. You got shut down, and you said, "You know what? I'm not giving up. I'm gonna go out and see how else I can do this." And there's a big lesson there, guys. Know your outcome, and you're gonna get bloodied, and you just keep going. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to interject
that's fine.
Because that's awesome. Okay,
yeah,
so
at this point, I had to really laser down and go, okay, I still want to buy a real estate. How on earth am I going to do this? And as luck would have it, I was, driving through a lot of neighborhoods trying to find something where a seller would provide this, owner financing. And I'll never forget the day I found this property because I'm driving up the street and here's this, this gray and white, just crappy looking triplex with a for sale by owner on it. There's beer cans all over the yard, and it's kind of looks like a half-finished construction project. And scrawled on this for sale by owner sign is this phone number. It says call Bill, and I'm like, I go, I think I'll give this gentleman a call. So I gave him a call, and first words out of his mouth was, "Who are you?" And second, how much are you going to give me for your property? And I was kind of like, well, I got to, look at the property, and I'd probably have to meet you, and we can kind of go over some numbers. So he goes, well, if you want to meet me right now, drive up to my house and bring a 12-pack of beer. And literally, that's how I got my first deal. So I drove up to his house with a 12-pack of beer. His favorite beer was Budweiser, and we put the deal down on a napkin, and then the next day I ran to my attorney and said, hey, is this legit? And he's kind of like, well, let's see if he follows through on it. And so that's how I got my first deal.
Can you get into the specifics of the transaction?
Basically, it was, at the time, what was it? I want to say it was about...
What was the purchase price? What was the loan amount, interest rate, all that?
It was about, I want to say around $38,000. Now, this is back in 1998.
Right.
And it was $5,000 down, and then he was going to carry a note over 10 years for the balance. And so... Fully amortized just for the 10 years, or amortized beyond that with a balloon in 10 years? Good point. No, it's actually amortized over 20 years.
Okay.
And I wanted to get the payment fairly low. I remember the payment was really, it was like next to nothing. It was like $300 a month or something.
Right.
And, so I got that going. And, I'll never forget the day that I go back. I was living in a studio apartment at the time with my girlfriend, and she knew I was always kind of like, this big, dreamer, I'm going to own real estate someday. And she would always roll her eyes at me. Well, the day I bought that property, which I didn't tell her, which was kind of a big mistake, but that being said, I brought her up to the property, and
she trashed it, right?
Oh, my God, it was hilarious. We're standing in front of this property, and I don't know if you remember the Griswolds from the movie Family Vacation, Chevy Chase. Yeah, so I got this little Chevy Chase moment going. I put my arms on her shoulder. I'm like, honey, we got our first property, and she just starts crying. And I'm just like, and I am so stupid. And I look at her like, oh, honey, those are tears of joy, aren't they? And she's like shaking her head back and forth, going, oh, my God, what have you done?
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
so.
Is she still in your life?
I eventually married her, and then she eventually left.
Okay.
She got fed up with the real estate.
Wow.
But bless her soul.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow.
I got two wonderful kids out of it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, and that's fantastic. Now, listen, I want to mention one thing because it's really something that I want my listeners to pick up on. You actually went and bonded with that seller. And obviously he set up the opening for that, and you probably didn't even realize what you were doing, but that's actually a strategy. If you find sellers in your marketing efforts and, maybe you do a mailing campaign to multifamily owners and you find a seller, bonding with them is huge, especially if you're talking about an old retired guy that is tired of it. It can be extremely important in your negotiation if you've got a relationship going with them. So don't underestimate the power of that. And I don't know if that's actually what happened with the beer, but I figure with 10 beers it probably is. But
no, it did. I mean, I've found some of my best deals getting face-to-face with the seller versus, going through a realtor. Right. And, I mean, I found deals, just from, in the beginning I was mowing all my own lawns. And I would just strike up conversations with the neighbors, and I probably picked up 5 or 6 properties just from mowing lawns and, striking up conversations with other rental property owners.
No kidding. Well, I know that you talk about doing all this with sweat equity, and it's very impressive to get 100 units without any partners and sweat equity. And you also talk about, creative financing. So are there any different examples, or did you really focus on seller finance deals, or tell us maybe some of the other things you've done?
Well, in the beginning, obviously that first deal I had to do seller finance just because I had no choice. But then once I had that deal under my belt, I was able to go qualify for a new loan on that after holding it for like 2 years. And I basically, I got the value up where it got appraised all the way up to like $90,000 or so. And from there, then, I'm living in this place, and so I was able to fix it up. Oh,
you were actually living in it. Oh.
Yeah, I moved in. I was literally hacking my housing, living there, and I think that's the other reason why my poor wife was crying, because she had to live there in a construction zone.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, you do what you have to do, and you obviously did what you have to do.
I mean, I tell these people that want to get into a rental property, and they immediately want to get this big, beautiful property. I'm like, look, you got to start somewhere, and your dream property won't be your first property. You just have to get one, and start going.
Oh, my God. Let me tell you about my first property. It was one of these shotgun. I bought it when I was 18. I was kind of proud of that, but it was a house in Denver, and it was a shotgun where you walk into the living room, you walk through the dining room, through the kitchen, which had the bathroom off the kitchen, to the bedroom in the back. I mean, just a flat roof, little piece of what.
Oh, yeah.
But, that's where you start, and that's okay. I'm not saying you have to start there, but if you tread lightly and you want to start slow, then that's where you start.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that deal I was actually acting as a springboard, going back to your financing question. So from there, I was able to actually throw a conventional loan on the property and pull money out, and that's when I was able to get into my next property, which was a FHA finance duplex. So once again, I moved into the next one with my wife, and at that point, she was pretty excited because it was a fairly nice duplex. It was a lot bigger. We were having a baby, and that one worked out really well. And as you probably know, with those, FHA loans, I was shocked. I didn't even know these things existed, but my banker's
they're
like,
fantastic. Yeah,
it's just amazing. 3% down. I mean, I think it cost me like $5,000 to get into a $100,000 property.
On multifamily. on multifamily. And see, what a lot of people don't realize, they think they have to use their financing to buy a house. They can use that FHA financing to buy a fourplex.
I know, and that is huge. If I would have known that in the beginning, I would have bought a fourplex. I was like, oh, interesting. I can do a duplex, but I never knew you could do it all the way up to a 4-unit,
It's fantastic financing. It's 30-year. It's backed by the government, 3% down. It's and you can even play with that a little bit sometimes with seller solar participation. So, wow, that's fantastic. So that was deal number 2.
Yep. So that was deal number 2, and then from there I started building relationships with different bankers, and as I started building more relationships with bankers, I started finding more deals, and so this.
Can you be a little more specific? So what did you do? You call a banker, you take them to lunch. What did you do? How did you build a relationship?
Yeah, so I'd basically, I'd work my network and say, okay, what banks in this town are landlord friendly? Because some banks, they just do not want to loan money to landlords. They're just not set up for it. And so, in the beginning, I was working with a really big box bank we won't name, and over time, I got up to 4 loans with them, and they basically said, my loan officer's like, well, Cory, we can't work with you anymore. You already have 4 loans. So then that's when I started going, well, maybe I can go over to, loan brokers or going to like a small regional bank within my town. And so I just, started asking around, asking other, big property owners and investors who their primary banker was, and it was through them they introduced me to different people, and that's when I picked up a couple of key relationships, at 2 different banks, and I'm still working with them today. They're awesome.
Wow. Now, you said I'm not sure that I heard you properly. Did you actually get deals through those banks, or it was just for financing? Did you have buy REO property from them?
To me, always the biggest puzzle as an investor is the financing. And
Sure.
And so I was at that point, after I moved into the second one, then I started, the loan market was pretty decent at the time. It wasn't as crazy as up to 2007, but at that point, as I started building equity, I was able to start stripping some of my equity out of these 2 properties, and then I'd go buy another one. I would negotiate with the seller. I'd do like a seller carry where they carry some money back, so I didn't have to put down a full 20 or 25% down. Oh,
the bank allowed you to do that?
That's a weird part. They allowed me to do that, but this is a totally different lending environment back then.
Right.
These days, I don't even think you can do that. Where you can.
Well, let me speak to that for a second.
Sure.
Because you can. In larger properties, okay, there are ways to do it legally in larger properties where the seller maybe will carry 10% and you can get in for 10% down, or even sometimes 15%.
Yep.
And you get it for 5% down. Now you could not do it with one of these residential properties, and when I say residential, I mean 1 to 4 units.
Exactly.
But 5 units or up, you can be creative because those banks assume a level of sophistication in the investors that deal in that space, and they're more lenient, frankly. And I tell people all the time, why buy a house? You can buy a 10-unit apartment complex for about the same amount of energy, and it might even be easier to get financed. So, but by the way, I forgot to mention in your intro, Cory's got a blog, and the website, and you should check it out because he adds tons of value. It's 10tomillion.com, and that's 10 written out, T-E-N, the number 2, million, spelled out, .com. So check that out. So you were starting to talk about getting into 07 and 08. What was your portfolio like in 08? How many properties did you have when the market crashed?
Let's see. So I was, let me do some math in my brain here. So let's see, I started in 98. The original goal was 10 duplexes, and I hit that goal and within 10 years. And so I believe I hit that goal within, let's say, 8 years. And so it was I'd say about a year or 2 before the crash that that's when I actually, unfortunately, got divorced. And that created a whole new set of challenges. Sure. And so I basically had to kind of put things on hold. And then once that settled down, as I went into the crash, fortunately, every property I purchased cash flowed right from the beginning.
Right.
So while the crash was extremely frustrating, leading up to it, I think what was even more frustrating was I was losing tenants that were able to purchase homes, because back then, anybody could buy a house. It was just
if you could fog a mirror, you could buy a house.
Yeah, it was just crazy. I mean, if you ever want to see how crazy it is, watch that movie, The Big Short, because they are spot on.
That movie's dead on. I know.
It is just scary. But so I would say up to the crash was probably the more challenging aspect, because at that point I had like 20 units, and I was having trouble keeping them filled, because I'd get college kids literally moving out and buying a house.
Right,
and
and people wonder why we had the recession that we had, the crisis that we had, that we're still pulling out of. It's because of crap like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to see these kids that would always pay late, and all of a sudden they get approved for a $200,000 house.
You just go, what the? Yeah. Now I will tell you, this is I really want to interject something at this point because it's so relevant. Guys, when the crash hit in 2008, I had 800 houses in Florida, and I got my ass handed to me, okay? I call that one of my biggest seminars. I call them seminars, and it was about a $50 million seminar. Now, had I been in duplexes or triplexes like my good friend Cory here, I wouldn't have had that happen. So, that's why I started this podcast, is to tell you guys, don't do houses. Duplexes, do 10 units, do quads, whatever, but don't do houses, because
I totally agree.
There's gonna be another correction, and when it happens, you need to be in multifamily real estate, because you'll survive it like Cory did here, no problem. The beautiful thing about multifamily real estate is, well, let me back up. If you have a single family house and it's empty, you're 100% vacant. If you have a duplex, you're only 50% vacant. Triplex, a third vacant. And very often in a duplex or a triplex, you can have a unit empty and still cash flow.
Oh yeah, I would say my model is kind of like, okay, if one unit goes vacant, the other unit has to cover my mortgage, taxes, and insurance, and that's your basic model. That was a basic model, and the second unit was pure. It wasn't pure profit, of course, because you have maintenance, vacancy, and CapEx or capital expenditures. But that was, that's a simplistic model. And fortunately,
that's as simple as you can get. I mean, if it cash flows with one unit occupied, then you'll buy it. And that's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. And I was going to ask you what your model was, and I expected something more sophisticated.
I'm sorry.
I'm glad it is. I'm glad it is, because anybody listening can adopt that one. It's a great one. So that's awesome.
Well, honestly, I think people make real estate too complicated, and there's just some basic rules. It's just like, one, does it cash flow? Okay.
Right.
And then two, can you get the right financing on it? Because the financing is just critical,
Absolutely.
You could have great cash flow, but if your financing blows up 5 years later, boom, there goes your whole model,
Let's talk about both those things in a little more detail, if you don't mind. As we talk about cash flow, guys, don't think because you're cash flowing $100 a month on a house you bought that you're really cash flowing, because I've got news for you, okay? You have one empty month, and if somebody moves out, it's typically going to take you a month and a half to get it occupied. You could wipe out all your cash flow just there, let alone the fix-up costs that you have to go through. So, when you're evaluating your cash flow, make sure you factor vacancy, make sure you factor marketing, make sure you factor a legitimate amount for maintenance. But I'll tell you something, Cory, your simplistic model for buying a Plex is, you can't get any easier or, frankly, more successful than following that model, because if one unit's empty, if one unit's occupied, you're cash flowing. That's a very safe place to be.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's on cash flow, but on financing. Speak to that. Why is financing so important in your view?
Well, and this is what I learned during the financial crisis. So as all the financing dried up, and this, I'm in the investment business. So my other job is I'm a financial advisor. And I was seeing some really crazy stuff going on with some of my clients along with the stock market. And I'm not going to say I predicted it. No one did, okay? But I did notice that the banks were getting a little goofy by giving everybody loans. So going into the financial crisis, I was actually really excited. I was like, God, if basically, the crap hits the fan, there are going to be these screaming real estate deals out there. And so sure enough, when it happened, I got all excited and I started trying to buy income properties. And that became the most frustrating period ever in my lifetime because I'd go to the banks.
Banks had shut down.
They did. I mean, I used to go to a bank and I was a rock star. I'd walk in, they're like, Cory, what are you buying next? Here's what I'm doing. Right. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, how much you need? And all of a sudden, it's like, I remember going to this one bank, once again, it'll be nameless, but they actually went under. And I said, hey, I've got this great, 10-unit apartment building. This thing's going to cash flow like crazy. The guy has to sell. And they're like, well, we're not loaning on that stuff anymore. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we lost a lot down in Arizona with these developers on condos. And so then I go back, I start talking to the banker, and I'm like, really, what's going on here? And he goes, look, the board will not give us any money anymore. The board's saying we're not going to get into income properties. And I wouldn't recommend this. You do this with your banker. But I basically got really frustrated, and I said, okay, so let me ask you something. When is the riskiest time to loan me money? And he kind of looks at me and goes, what do you mean? I go, well, is it risky to loan me money when the real estate market is high or low? Let me break it down for you. And he goes, well, when the market's low. I go, okay, so is the real estate market high or low right now? And he starts squirming in his seat. He starts going, well, it doesn't work that way. I go, the market's low. Everything's on sale. You should be loaning me money. And unfortunately, that banker left the business. His bank went under. But that was, number one, the most frustrating time of my life because I couldn't buy anything. Sure. So I had to go back to seller financing to pick up deals just because I was sitting there for 2 or 3 years and the banks were loaning money. So
no, they completely shut down, and as you said, lots of them went out of business. A lot of banks I was doing business with went out of business. Tough time. I was having a tough time for a different reason, but yeah, definitely a tough time. So, how are you presently funding your deals?
So now I'm pretty much focusing strictly on multifamily that's 5 units or higher. So let's say commercial apartment buildings. Mm-hmm. And going back to our earlier discussion. My perfect deal is, I get in there at 10 to 15% down, and the seller carries a note from anywhere from 10 to 30%, and then the actual bank carries the rest. And that's just, going back to your earlier comments, actually cheaper to buy, let's say, a 5 to 10 unit apartment building than it is to buy a single family home, because these commercial banks, as long as the cash flows and you have a good track record with them, you've got experience running these properties, a lot of them will allow you to do a deal with less than 25% down. Right.
That's great. So tell us about your first 5 unit or above. Was that a creative deal, or did you end up putting the 20 to 25% down?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't that creative back then. That was. Okay. Let's see, that would have been a 6-unit property, and I found this deal was kind of an estate sale in that I knew the guy that had passed away, and I tried to buy properties from him for years. And every time he'd say, oh, I can't sell that one. That's my favorite property. And so, his name was Jack. He was just, God, he's the nicest guy in the world. And this guy owned a ton of properties in this town. And, classic
all free and clear?
All free and clear. He inherited it from his dad. He didn't put a nickel into them,
Wow.
But this guy, the classic guy, never married, and lived with his mom.
Wow.
and he was actually an attorney.
Wow. Oh, boy.
In fact, all his money went to a giant charity, and it went to a really nice charity. It's going to this school to provide technical training, for these kids that don't want to go to college. And so,
awesome.
I mean, millions went to this thing. But anyway, so old Jack, he passes away, and I find this listing through a Wells Fargo broker. And so I ran to the trust department and said, hey, I need to buy this building. And I basically I said, I'll give you your full price, because I knew it was a deal. And that's how I got in my first 6-unit deal. And that one was...
How did you finance it? I mean, what kind
that
of...
one was tough. I had to go back to because at that point I had like 10 duplexes. And so what I did was I was able to go and put on... I put together like 2 or 3 line of credits against these properties. And with those...
Oh, so you paid cash for the deal using collateral?
No, I didn't pay cash because it was, at the time, it was a pretty spendy deal for me. I think I bought it for like $260 or something. And I had to raise a full 25% down to buy this from the trust department because they were going to finance it for me. But it was a huge bank, and they didn't do anything as creative. So they said 25% down is the only way you're going to get this deal done. And so I figured, well, if I go with them with the financing, then they're going to sell to me versus some other guy down the street,
Right.
And so that one I raised a full 25% down, pulled equity through line of credits against various duplexes, and then carried a loan with them. And then I eventually refied that loan out after like 5 years.
Sure. Paid back your lines of credit and all that.
Yep,
business.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So you've never taken partners. Why not?
I should. And I'm definitely afraid of losing people's money. And so, and the other reason is back when I moved back to my hometown from San Francisco, I was working with my brother and my dad, and those two were in a partnership, and my God, did they fight. And I was just like, and the whole time I just watching these two guys, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know about these partnership things. And I just kept thinking, the toughest ship to sail is a partnership. I mean, it's just, so I would say realistically, I haven't found the right partner that thinks like me, long-term, buy and hold, not someone that's going to try to cash out right away, to feed their family. You really got to find the right partner that shares the same philosophy.
I agree completely. Yeah, I've had quite a few partnerships, and some have been spectacular successes, and others have been spectacular failures. So I totally understand. So,
and I realize it's better to have 10% of something, than 100% of nothing. But I actually flip that around and say, well, you know what? I'd rather have 100 properties, or 100 units under my belt, than 1,000 units where I only own 10%. Of that partnership.
It's tomato, really. Honestly, for some people, and I want to interject this because I love what you've done. Don't get me wrong, love it, and it's probably the ideal way. But a lot of people don't have the resources to get started. And I like to tell people, listen, if you've got to do your first deal or two, and even if you only get 10% of it, then you're getting the experience. You're learning from someone that's done it. Ideally, they've put up all the money. You found the deal and presented it to somebody that's got some money and the ability to borrow, or a combination of of people that are able to put it together. And even if your first deal you don't own the whole thing, that's okay because you're getting started.
That's actually a good strategy because then you can use that money. So let's say you're going in a big multifamily with other folks, and their concept is, a value add where, okay, we're going to, hold it for 5 years, then we'll get it refinanced and we'll get all your money back, That'd be a good way to build up seed capital so you go get your own property, on your own after you do that.
Exactly.
Yep, that totally makes sense.
Not just the seed capital. It also gives you the experience with the bank when you go to do it yourself.
That's true.
I'm one of the owners of this deal right here, and so...
and you can watch them operate it and, get the quarterly statements,
Exactly.
Yep, and see exactly what's involved,
Now, if the ideal situation, Cory, I think is the way you're doing it. Do it yourself without partners. But a lot of people that just doesn't work, and it didn't work for me. I mean, I bought 500 houses in Denver with partners, and I ended up buying them all out. But
that's not a bad strategy.
No, and that works. That works too.
That works nice.
That works too. So we talked about how you got over your fear. So what drives you? I mean, what makes you jump out of bed in the morning? What's your motivation?
I'm actually working on a blog post on this. It's called The Big Why. And
good.
Yeah, the original, what originally drove me was in the very beginning, when I bought the 10 duplexes, my original goal was, okay, you know what? I don't know if I can say this on a podcast, but I want what I call FU money. So, and yeah, so it's just, it's a pot of money that says, you know what, F you because I'm tired of working here. And, so that was my original goal. I wanted absolute freedom. So if I just wanted to quit working, boom, I'm done. And I could just, tinker around on my, 20-unit duplex portfolio because I got 10 properties.
Right. Which is fun, by the way, guys, which is a lot of fun, just to screw around with your real estate, drive by it, look at it. I
love doing that.
Me too. I mean, what else can you do that someone else pays for, and you can just go and look at it? It's tangible. It's not like a stock that you can't see.
Exactly.
You can go look at it. Yeah, okay.
It's fun, and that's originally the way I was. I want to be that old guy that's, old pickup truck, It's like, I'm going to go drive by my properties and pick up the garbage in the front yard, or mow the lawn,
Right.
Yeah,
I met an old Jewish guy in Denver that reminded me of your Jack, and he had tons of plexes and units and all free and clear. And, I told him I wanted to do it as well, and he said, but he's like, put his arm around me and said, you want buckets of money, go buy real estate and get it paid off. Buckets of money. And I've never forgotten.
So true. Buckets of money. I like that.
Yeah. So
I like the wheelbarrow guys.
Exactly.
that you interviewed.
Exactly. Yeah, Jake and Gino, right.
Yeah, that was a great show.
You're doing a blog post on the power of why. I did actually one of my driving force tips on the power of why. You've got to, people go out and they do their goals, but they don't really write down why they want them, and it's the why that drives you. So,
exactly.
I'm looking forward to reading your post. Let's see. Let's say you're coaching somebody that wants to get it going in real estate. What would you tell them to do? How would you get them going?
It always goes down to what are their long-term goals? Because I think a lot of people are like, I want to get into real estate, and they might try flipping or wholesaling and all that garbage. And I'm pretty, these are just my opinions, but I believe none of that stuff is just worth it. I'd rather just be a straight buy and hold investor. So if someone came to me and they had the buy and hold mindset, where they want to build, the FU fund, then I would say if they're especially if they're a first-time home buyer and they can qualify, I'd say go find a fourplex, live in one unit, and learn the trade or the craft of being in the business.
Love that advice. And I want to add something to what you just said, because it's the whole reason I do this thing. You see all these podcasts about flipping and wholesaling and all that stuff. But guys, can you make some money doing that? Sure. But it's a job. It's a job.
It's a total job. And even the IRS looks at it. I mean, it's funny. The IRS will look at a flipper or a wholesaler, and they have a special classification for them. It's called a dealer, like a car dealer. Like a drug dealer. I mean, it's just like...
I don't know if I take it that far, but
I know, not drug dealers. They don't pay taxes.
Right, exactly. I would say this, every January 1st, if you're in that business, you get up and start working again. Cory doesn't have to work. Cory gets to play with his real estate. You wouldn't have to do anything else as long as you live with the portfolio that you have, Cory.
Exactly.
So, that's the point here. That's why my podcast is called Lifetime Cash Flow, because that's what you get buying and handling multifamily. And so, I really appreciate that advice. So we're getting near the end of the show here, and I'd love it if I could eke one more bit of wisdom out of you, maybe one golden nugget. Actually, you know what? I want to ask you one more thing. Do you have? You talked about John Schaub's book. What's another great book that and it doesn't have to be real estate related. It can be on any topic that you would recommend to my readers. And I know I'm catching you off guard with this question, but if you've got one that comes to mind, I'd
I've read so many books, but I would have to go back to number one. You have to get the John Schaub book. I mean that just lays it out. And then rather than focus on single family as John talks about, I would say just take the whole concept and say, I'm going to focus on multifamily, okay?
Right.
And then the other book is, I think it's called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think I have it, actually.
Gary Keller, Keller
is
Realty.
That the author? Okay.
But
we'll put it in the show notes. We'll put it in the show notes, the exact title if that's not it. But I'm pretty sure you did call it correctly, and that is a great book as well.
And I actually still to this day revisit that book because it's just a great read, you know. And
awesome.
and he talks more about multifamily, you know, and compounding, you know, your equity, refinancing it out, and going in and buying even more properties.
Right. Which is the fantastic formula. So. Somebody wants to get into real estate. They haven't taken the first step. What's that last little piece of advice you're going to tell them?
Now, are we going back to the person that's going to buy the fourplex? Or just someone that's totally brand new and doesn't even know where to start?
Let's pick somebody totally brand new, doesn't know where to start. What bit of advice would you give them?
Okay, number one, I would start with reading the books so you get the real estate mindset. And then number two, I would run to a bank and get pre-qualified to figure out how much you can afford.
Fantastic.
And that's, now here's the deal. Some people go, well, I know I can't get pre-qualified. Well, that's fine. Just go there and find out what you can afford. And if you can't afford a property, they're going to tell you that, and then you're going to get some good information on, well, here's what I need to do to get to the point where the bank's going to loan me money. And then you can change your life accordingly.
You need a roadmap. They'll give you the roadmap. If you don't have, if you can't do it right then and there, you're going to find out what you have to be able to do it. Great advice, Cory. Thank you. Well, listen, thank you so much for your valuable time. Really appreciate it. I hope we can stay in touch and follow each other's progress in this fun business.
It's an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. All right, you take care of yourself.
You too. Thanks, Ron.
All right.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and then take a moment to visit iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. For more resources to connect with us further, please visit our website at lifetimecashflowpodcast.com. Tune in next week for our next show.